was startled out of my deep thought and angst when the captain came over the cabin speaker. You've heard the spiel, right? We've reached our cruising altitude of 33,000 feet. We are on our way down to Nassau, Bahamas. We'll have you on the ground in 2 hours and 30 minutes. The weather there is 86 pristine degrees, just like every June day in Nassau. We hope you sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight. I was doing anything but sitting back and relaxing and enjoying the flight. I was on my way down to the Bahamas because 6 months earlier, I'd been invited to be a part of a kind of mastermind group in Orcas Island. And the host had said to me numerous times, "Ron, have you ever met Clint?" And I said, "No, I've never met Clint." And he used to say to Clint, "Hey, Clint, haven't you and Ron interacted at a conference somewhere somehow?" And Clint was always like, "No." And so Clint was on his way to Orcas Island with his board of directors, and we were going to finally get to meet and talk about creativity and leadership. And so we finally met. And over the next several days, we got to know each other, decided to continue the conversation on Skype. And a little bit further in, a couple months later, Clint said to me, he said, "Hey, Ron, I know that you're leaving your job of 18 years behind and you're moving on to some new ventures. Why don't you come on down to Nassau and spend a few days just decompressing the last 12.5 years?" Invite like that. Cheers, I'm in, right? So I'm on a plane, 33,000 feet. And what begins to unravel inside of me is ugly and it's embarrassing. I had had an amazing 18-year run, speaking all over the place, writing magazine cover articles, getting book contracts, being a part of arguably one of the most ridiculously creative teams you could imagine. But what I did not expect to come face to face with, having left all of that in the rearview mirror just a few hours earlier, was that all the applause and all the accolades and all the validation had come to define and intoxicate me far more than I ever realized. And I sat there at 33,000 feet in a Delta Airlines seat asking the question, who in the world am I apart from all of this? And I was having something of an egoic meltdown. In those days, I prided myself, maybe you understand this, I prided myself on flying Mach 2 upside down with my hair on fire, going from event to event, from goal to goal. And what I didn't realize then that began to make more sense as months went by is that when you are on a numbing autopilot trajectory, that autopilot is probably constructing a self you are unaware of. Janet Murray, in her fantastic book, Hamlet on the Holodeck, talks about how our lives are made up of disparate pieces, and it is up to us and the people around us. We start constructing narratives that pen how to make sense and coherence out of all the stuff happening in our lives. But this is what she says, and it's fascinating, that if we're not careful, this narrative that's been penned out here that is immersive and definitional, her words, if we're not careful, will come to define how we think about the very life we have on the inside. And that had happened to me. I had been happily skimming through life, losing touch with what I most needed. And as a result of that, found myself in this painful situation, wondering who's going to validate me. And so, not to worry though, I'm thinking, you know what? I'm going to sweep this under the rug. I'm never going to think about it again. I'm just having a little post-game jitters. I'm leaving the only job I've ever had since getting out of school. And I'm going to go down to the Bahamas anyway. We're going to decompress this. And surely that means something like we're going to sit on the beach, have some meaningful conversation. I'm going to read a stack of books I brought. And we're definitely, I sure hope, going to have some adult beverages of a Bahamian rum sort. We're in Bahamas, right? Near Cuba. And so I land. Clint greets me. He says, "Come on, I want you to go meet my family. I want you to meet my wife and kids. We're going to have dinner. And then let me tell you what we're going to do." He says, "You know what? Native Bahamians grow up on what are called the Family Islands. And I grew up on the island called Abaco. And Abaco is the bone fishing capital of the world. And I'm looking all excited and my countenance is up. I'm trying to be a good guest. But inside my heart is sinking because I think I know where this conversation might be going. And the next thing out of his mouth confirms it. He says, and I thought we'd go fishing the next 4 days. I grew up in Michigan. It's the Great Lakes state, right? Most of my friends grew up with a shotgun in one hand to hunt, a fishing rod in the other hand to fish. I'd fished one time in my life when I was 8 and swore I would never do something so boring again. And so I grew up with a tennis racket and a golf club in my hands. And so on my time to decompress, we're going to fish for 4 or 5 days. Wow. So the next morning we get up, he's got a little plane ready for us. We jump over to the family island, we go up to his parents' house. We then walk down to the beach. And we're at the beach, and he begins explaining to me what's going to go on because it becomes pretty obvious to him I'm a novice. And so he hands me a fishing rod, tells me how it all works, and then tells me what we're going to do. And he says, here's the deal. We're going to go to the salt flats. Salt flats are calf-deep water where you walk around kind of Inspector Clouseau style, right? A little Pink Panther going on. And what we're going to do is we're going to look for the glint of bonefish fins in schools of fish while we're walking along and hopefully cast into the school and catch fish. All right, you know what? I think I can do this. I can do anything for 4 days, right? Okay. So off we go. So we're walking along, quietly talking, and then pretty soon Clint's like, stop. He goes, just a minute. Right. Can you see the bonefish fins? Do you see right? And so I'm getting my body English just like his. I'm getting down. I'm tilting my head. I'm looking right where he's pointing. He goes, do you see it? And I was like, no. So he gets down again. He says, no, right here. Watch. What do you see? Just watch it. Go watch the sun hit. Watch it. Can you see it? And I'm like, still can't. He casts, he catches, he reels in a bonefish. They fight like mad. He catches it and releases it. And he says, okay, now, so here's the story. Let me tell you what we're going to do again. And he begins to explain it again. And what Clint didn't understand was I understood the instructions. I just couldn't see the flippin' bonefish fins. That was the problem. I couldn't see it. And so this little dog and pony show went on several cycles. Wash, rinse, repeat, wash, rinse, repeat. We just kept doing it. Never, read my lips, in the 4 hours that we did this, could I see any fish. I did cast once because he said, hey, listen, cast over there, there's some fish. And so at 4 hours, we began walking in toward the beach where his parents' house was. And he said to me, he says, so, what do you think? What do you think about this? And I said, well, Clint, if I'm really honest, super frustrating. He said, yeah, I can understand. He says, can I make an observation? And I said, sure. And he said, what are the chances that if you are struggling to see the physical glint of a bonefish fin in the sun, that you are having trouble seeing something invisible going on deep down inside you? And the universe conspires. Clint had absolutely no idea that 24 hours earlier at 33,000 feet, I was undergoing an identity crisis saying, I don't know who I am apart from all this other stuff. But I held my pose. I didn't let on like anything was going on, of course. And I said, oh, yeah, maybe, yeah. And then Clint reached into his backpack that we had some of our fishing gear in, and he pulled out a little book, and he flipped it down onto the beach. And he said, Ron, I know you've been to India a lot of times. And he said, Anthony DeMello was a fantastic mystic of the last century. And this little book has changed my life. I've had this little book that he gave me for 13 years now. And he says, this little book has changed my life, and it's brought awareness to me and awakening to me. And I just wonder if maybe while you're here in the Bahamas, you need to think about and maybe do some awareness work. And maybe you can begin reading this, and we can begin having conversations about it. And I'm still holding the pose. And I said, oh, yeah, you know what? Personal development, I'm all about it. Yeah, let's do that. And so I go in that night to my guest room, and I open up this little book to the very first page of the book, the very first chapter, the first paragraph, the first line, and I want to read to you what this says. Recall the time of feeling you have when someone praises you, when you are approved and accepted and applauded. In contrast, that kind of feeling that arises within you when you look at a sunset or a sunrise or nature in general, or when you read a book or watch a movie that you thoroughly enjoy. Get the taste of this feeling and contrast it with the first, namely the one that was generated within you when you were praised. Understand that the first type of feeling comes from self-glorification and self-promotion, and it's a worldly feeling. The second comes from self-fulfillment, a soul feeling. And the universe conspires again. But not without something beginning then to finally shift in me. And what I began to understand and unravel over the ensuing months was what every great religious tradition's mystical strand talks about. And that is, pain is simply pain unless pain is coupled with reflection. And when pain is coupled with reflection, it becomes potentially a potent, creative catalyst for transformation. It can literally change the game. One of the things that happens when you experience these painful ahas, these painful moments, is something that can't happen almost any other way. Because if on autopilot you are constructing a self you're unaware of, what pain does is it rivets you back out of that autopilot and rivets you to the here and sacred now. Pain has an ability to get you into now like nothing else does. And so here I sat, feeling this nowness. And you know what happens in the now? When you're not arriving prematurely in the future, you start to see things right now that you couldn't see before. And that's what was happening to me. In fact, there is a whole raft of academic literature that actually talks about what I was undergoing, that I've gotten in touch with now over the last 13 years. Robert Keegan, arguably the greatest voice and researcher on this whole topic of human development, who's been chairman of adult development and education at Harvard for the last 3 decades, says there's 2 kinds of knowing. There's informational knowing, where we increase the bucket of our information. That is what the global education system is built on. We learn basic arithmetic, we add to it algebra, then trigonometry, then pre-calculus, then calculus, and our bucket of information grows and we grow, and that's growth. And he says, but that is not transformation. Transformation happens when we experience the movement of material from subject to object. What does that mean? Translation. Material that is subject to you, material that is subject to me, is material so embedded in who I am, it is material that has me. It is embedded in my presuppositions, in my assumptions. It is material in the background music of our lives. It's material that's in our lenses, and we don't even know we have lenses on. But through a painful moment, through an aha time, through some reflection, what happens is that material that is subject to us gets jarred loose, and it pops out here, and it becomes an object, and we can look at it and we go, oh my gosh, didn't know that was there. And in my case, oh my gosh, that is ugly, and I had no idea that was there. And in those times, something begins to happen. I recognize that I had been living a life in tight compression, moving from event to event to event. And while I'm in this event, I'm already thinking about the next one. And while I'm reaching and working on this goal, I'm already thinking about the next one. And as a result, all sorts of things are starting to unravel. I'm losing touch with the craft I'm trying to hone. I'm losing touch with the dent I'm trying to make. My mental real estate is beginning to shrink. My emotional bandwidth is beginning to shrivel. And I'm realizing I am losing touch with maybe the most fundamental question that all of us have to ask, that maybe is posed most elegantly by the great poet Mary Oliver, when she asks, What are you going to do with the one wild and precious life you've been given? And so I was faced with, what am I going to do? And so the next several days with Clint, I began for the first time installing into my life a silent, sitting, meditative practice. In fact, one of the Sanskrit words for meditation is to get to know the self. And for the last 13 years, whatever continent I was on, whatever country I was in, whatever my flight schedule was, I found time to do a sitting meditative practice. Did one this morning, like I do every single morning. And it is the fundamental, foundational piece that has contributed to my evolving to this day. Of course, some might say I'm devolving, but evolving to this day. And it has changed my life because it enables me to get in touch with the self that's being built. It makes me more aware of spots I can't see. And it totally changed everything about my life and my coaching practice and it's just changed everything. And so I want to encourage you with just a couple things and invite into your curiosity a couple things. One, are you on autopilot, asleep, unaware, or are you awake and alive and living right here, right now, and savoring everything you possibly can? Are you, second thing to think about, are you building the self you're aware of and the self you want to become? Or are you having a narrative penned about your life by somebody else? By maybe a coach or maybe a parent, maybe even a deceased parent who had expectations in a story they thought you should live. And then last, do you have the patterns and practices? Do you have the rhythms and rituals? Do you have the protocols in your life that enable you in moments of pain or in moments of aha to process the data, to process what's going on, to know what to do as material jars loose from subject and comes out here and goes, oh my gosh, didn't know that was there. Is there something in you? Is there a pattern, a practice that enables you to process that? I want to encourage you today. More than ever in our world, the world needs you. And the world needs your craft. So whatever you do, do not play small with your life. The world deserves better, and you deserve wildly better than that. And I want to encourage you, deep dive your experiences. Smell the wine you drink. Smell the herbs on the plate of food you're eating. Listen attentively to the loved ones around you. Live in the sacred now. And then hone the elegance of your craft so that you can make a dent and leave a mark on this world. With gratitude, thank you.